All right, so many of you have asked me to explain how I use Neovim to develop my applications and what does my development workflow look like, so I decided to make a video. We're going to start by explaining the tooling that I use, for example, Kitty, Tmux, and Neovim in the first part, and then I'm going to go into the development workflow, how I use Neovim and Tmux to navigate between files, between code, debugging, version control, testing, etc. So, let's dive in. I start by opening Kitty, and Kitty is the terminal that I use to work in. There is no special reason why I use Kitty. I used to use iTerm, and then I moved on to Alacrity, and then I just landed on Kitty and just kept using Kitty. To me, it feels like the easiest to configure, and I can also share my dot files easily, unlike iTerm, so I just like to use Kitty. Okay, then immediately after opening Kitty, I usually open Tmux. And Tmux is a terminal multiplexer that allows you to create different sessions, for example, per projects. And you can have your own configuration of terminals for each session and also different layouts, etc. So let's attach to my .files session. There we go. You initially see Neovim, but if you look at the bottom, this .files nvim1 zsh, this bar at the bottom is Tmux's bar. Okay, and Tmux basically allows me to create windows and special layouts, etc. So here's how I can navigate between the windows. And actually, let me set up Keycaster right here so you can see as I'm typing. There we go. As I'm typing now, you're going to see all of the hotkeys in this little window. So I navigate between the windows in Tmux by using Control-B, which is the leader key or the prefix in Tmux, and just jump between the windows using number. So Control B 1 will take me to the first window, Control B 2 will take me to the second window. So as you can see in here in the first window, I have Neovim opened, in which I'm coding, doing whatever I want to do. And in the second window, I have a plain terminal opened, which I can execute commands, I can do npm install, etc. And here is my Tmux configuration. All of these config files can be found in my .files repo, and I'm going to put a link of it in the description below, so make sure to check it out. I'm basically installing Tokyo Night for the theme, TPM for the package management, Sensible for some Sensible defaults. The Asaro with Tmux is an interesting plugin that allows me to navigate in and out of Tmux and between Tmux and Neovim using hotkeys. So for example, if I make a split horizontal and do Control H, you can see the cursor jumped in Neovim. But if I do Control L, still in Neovim, and again Control L, now we are in Tmux land, right? So I can basically jump between Neovim and Tmux, and that plugin allows me to do that. Then I have session X, which allows me to jump between sessions using the prefix Control B and then S. And as you can see, I have a bunch of sessions open, like Buffet, Hackweek, Next.js Clean Architecture, and the currently opened one, .files. So if I just hit enter while selecting Buffet, I am immediately going into the Buffet session, and this is my Buffet project. It's a Next.js application that I'm working on. If I need to switch back to the .files session, all I need to do is Control B, S to open the sessions, and I can even type it in .files, hit enter, and now I'm in my .files. And then we have Tmux Resurrect, which allows me to save all of my session configuration into a file on the file system, so that if my computer restarts, I can resurrect the session from that file. That's because by default, Tmux saves all of the session configuration in memory. So when your computer restarts, or if you run out of battery, etc., your sessions are going to get destroyed. Tmux Resurrect basically allows you to save the sessions and restore them after you restart your computer. Then I have a bunch of options right here, and I'm not going to go through each of them. I have comments on some of them, so make sure to check out my .files and you'll see all the commands that I have there. Okay, let's get into the Neovim configuration. So I'm using LazyVim as my Neovim distribution. It is basically a base configuration with some really good defaults, but it also allows you to extend it and bring your own plugins, etc. So I use everything by default, and I have a bunch of plugins that I've overridden. For example, if you go to nvim, lua, config, and lazy, you're going to see the file that actually initializes lazy and adds all of the extras. These extras are, as the name suggests, extra configurations that aren't turned on by default, but once you turn them on, they basically set up something for you. For example, here's how I set up Copilot, GitHub Copilot, right? The Copilot and Copilot chat. I just add these two lines and I have GitHub Copilot enabled. This is for debugging, some editor plugins. This is Prettier. This is how I set up Prettier, and a bunch of languages like Astro, Docker, Go, JSON, Python, TypeScript, etc. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the files in this file. Just wanted to show you where things start to get initialized. And then if you go to plugins, you're going to see all of the plugins and scripts that I've overridden. So for example, in the coding.lua, I have inc rename, and this is a plugin that allows me to rename variables. Let me actually show you. I'm going to switch over to buffet. Let's go to the output variable, and I can do space for my leader key in Neovim, not in Tmux, C for code, and R for rename. And you see this little input? That is basically inc rename. So if I rename this to output and hit enter, not just a variable name, but then also any usage is going to get renamed as well. Yeah, let's go back to the .files. This is how I set up my color scheme. The color scheme that I'm using right now is the Cyberdream. Really cool color scheme, optimized for like transparent or blurry backgrounds. As you can see at the background, I have some blurry gradients going on. Yeah, color scheme is in color scheme.lua. Then I have DAP, and this DAP thing is actually a debug adapter protocol, and it allows you to set up breakpoints and debug your applications. So I'm using the default LazyVim configuration, and I just do two things. One is I swap the functionality of these two keys, D capital O and D lowercase o, because I'm using step over much more often than I'm using step out. I needed to swap the keys in order to use it more fluently, because D capital O also involves hitting shift to capitalize the O. And because I'm using step over more frequently in like bursts, for example, step over, step over, step over, I don't want to be holding shift. So it's much easier if it's on the lowercase o than the uppercase o. So yeah, that's all I'm doing here. And I'm also adding a new plugin called Neovim Dev Virtual Text, which shows me a little virtual text inside of the same line of the value of the variable that's on that line. I'm going to show you later. And yeah, I'm telling it to respect the 80th column line, which is this line right here. So all of the values will be on this side. Okay, this is how I set up my LSP. Again, I'm using the default LazyVim configuration, and all I do in this block right here is just disable the no information available notification when I do a hover on a specific variable. For example, if I do hover here, nothing happens, and hover is basically Shift K. But if I do hover here, I can actually see the signature of this property, etc. So in this case, there was a little notification that showed up. So I just disabled it like this. And then at the bottom, I'm actually overriding the nvim lsp config for TypeScript to disable some of the inlay hints because it was just too much. I didn't actually need the enum member values or parameter names or parameter types. It was just too noisy. So I ended up disabling these inlay hints. Then we have Mason, and Mason is basically the plugin that downloads all of the LSPs for me. And if you don't know what an LSP is, it basically enables IDEs and code editors to support programming languages more efficiently. So I'm using Mason to pull in all of these LSPs, and I don't think these are all of the LSPs that I pull in, so I do need to update this list, but this is basically how you make sure that these LSPs are going to be installed. You can also do Mason, and I can see all 45 LSPs that I have installed. Okay, then I have Neotree, which is this panel right here. And Neotree is basically a file tree. I can toggle it with leader E. And this is enabled by default in LazyVim, but I'm actually positioning it on the right and also hiding the dot files except the .env. That's all. Then another important thing is the Neovim CMP, and CMP stands for completion. And this is basically this. When I start entering code and I do control space, I get this little menu with auto-completion. So in this case, I'm in Lua and I do not have Lua configured for auto-completion. So as you can see, it's basically giving me some weird text that it has seen in this file. But if I switch over to my bfab project, for example, I can do output dot control space and check it out. I have Copilot as the first suggestion, and this is the Copilot extension that I enabled through the extras. And then I also have a fingerprint property, and it knows that because it knows the output is of this specific type, which contains the definition of fingerprint. So that is basically Neovim CMP. And what I do to it is basically a fancy border, as you can see, for both the completion and the documentation, and that's all. Okay, the next file that I want to show you is the Neotest file. Neotest is a plugin for running unit tests, and I also add the Neotest Jest and the Neotest vtest plugins because that's what I use to write my unit tests. And this is how I set it up. I'm going to show you testing later as well. Okay, so enough about Neovim. I'm going to get into my development workflow so I can show you how I use all of these tools to, be productive while developing my applications. I'm going to switch over to my bfab project, which is as I mentioned, a Next.js project. It uses TypeScript, and yeah, this is my pet project. Okay, so let me show you how I navigate between files. There are multiple ways. The first way that you already see is using the Neotree on the right, so I can Control L to jump into it and just, look at the files, click at a file, and now I'm into the file, right? So I'm coding. That is one way, but that can be slow. The other way is by using Telescope, and I am activating Telescope through space, which is leader, right? Telescope actually implements a fuzzy finder, which I often use to find files. For example, I want to jump into the collections repository, and there we go. We have all of these matches. I'm interested in the bottom three. And this is the interface, this is the mock service, this is the real service. I want to get into the real service. So now I'm in the real service, right? I didn't have to jump between all of the folders right here in the Neotree. I can just do space, type in the name of the file that I want to get into, and there we go. And that's one way to do. The other way, which I don't use as often, is through Harpoon. So Harpoon is a plugin that allows you to harpoon a file, or put a pin in a file. It's basically creating a shortcut to that file, and you can navigate between those files by using leader and 1 through 5. So you have 5 files, you can navigate between them. I think you can have more than 5. Harpoon has a little menu that you can open by leader H, and it basically gives you a list of all of the files that you have harpooned. So for example, if I want to jump to the delete collection use case file, which is on the 4th line, all I need to do is just leader or space 4. So let's try that. Space 4. There we go. I am in the delete collection use case file, and I can just start typing. So those are the ways that I use to jump between code files, search for files and enter files, etc. Now let's see how I navigate between codes, which is also important. For example, if I wanted to go into the definition of the get injection method, I should not be looking for the di container and doing space di container.ts. I can do that and then look for the get injection method, but it's a lot better if I just get to the get injection method and then do space g and then d, which triggers the go to definition. There we go. I am taken at the exact method that I'm looking for, get injection, right? So I use this a lot. If I do get user in this case, and this is of the type I authentication service, then I'm going to be taken to the get user method inside of the interface. So let's see that, space GD. There we go. We are in the interface and I am highlighting the get user method. If I want to see all of the references of the get user method, for example, every file and every line where the get user method is being used, I can do space GR, which is go to references. And it is Telescope again, and it opens a list where I can see all of the files where the get user method is being mentioned, but the actual get user method. including implementations. So for example, here's a test, sign in with passport.controller.tests, and this is the line where the getUser method is being used. But then if we go down, we can see that we have authentication service.ts, getUser is not being used as a method, but because this class implements the interface, it also gives it as a suggestion here. So yeah, I use these shortcuts heavily as well, just like the GD. I also use GR a lot because it just makes it easier to jump between the code. And I'm not even talking about files. I don't care where that code is. I want to see the references, and I'm looking for the actual implementation, and where we go. This is the mock service implementation. This is the real service. Yeah, I want to get here. There we go. Now we're in. I can also jump between only the implementations of this method, because this is an interface. The LSP will help me find only the implementations. So if I just do G without space, this time without leader, and go to implementation on the capital I, I'm going to see a list where there's only two items. One is the authentication service, the real one, and the other one is the mock one. And these are the two implementations of this method that belong to this interface. So I also use this a lot. Another shortcut that I'm using heavily is jump to next or previous reference. For example, I am hovering the data variable right here. And if I want to jump to the next line or next occurrence where the data variable is being used, I can do that with two shortcuts. One of them is the double square brackets closed and open for next and previous. So if I do double square brackets, you can see that my cursor is jumping on the previous and the next occurrence of data. I can also do it with option N for next and P for previous. I don't know which one I prefer. I have a weird muscle memory when it comes to next and previous occurrence. Sometimes I use the NP, sometimes I use the double closing and opening square brackets. I just keep both of these in mind. Sometimes I also want to search for a specific string inside of the whole project. And I can do that by leader S and then G for grep. Again, this is telescope. And as I'm going to start typing into the input right here, this list right here will populate. So if I'm searching for collections repository, it gives me all of the files that contain collections repository, but as a string, not as an LSP reference or the actual collections repository. For example, I can do also data. And we can see every occurrence, every line in every file where data as a word is being mentioned. And you can also look at the preview on the right. So this is also leader SG. It's basically a grep search for a specific string inside of the project that I have opened. These annoying check marks come from Neotest, and this is definitely a bug. I need to fix this. But luckily they don't actually cause any problems. They just make noise, make visual noise. Okay, so I showed you all the ways that I can navigate, jump between code and references and search for specific strings. But sometimes jumping between two files can become a tedious job. And that's when I use splits to actually split the screen or the editor into two editors, and I can put one file on one side and another file on the other side. And I can do that in two ways. For example, SS will make a horizontal split, basically create a horizontal line in the middle of the screen and put the same file on top and bottom. So I can jump between these two using Control and JK. And now, for example, I'm focused on the bottom one. I can do space to bring up the Find Files menu. And I can, let's go to vtest.config. Now I have vtest.config file at the bottom and also the add link to collection controller at the top. So I can code here while I'm looking at the file here. I can also do this vertically. For example, SV will create a vertical split, a vertical line, put the same file on the right side, and now I can also do, components.json. So I'm looking at this file, but I'm coding in this file. I use the vertical split a lot more often than the horizontal, to be honest, but I have an option for both. And it doesn't have to be just two files. For example, I might have the components.json, but I also want to look at the packages.json on the right side below, right here in this space. In this case, because I'm focused here, I can do SS. This will make a horizontal split in this pane, and I can do space package.json. So now I have package.json in the bottom right, I have components.json in the top right, and I have my add link to collection controller on the whole left side. These are called panes in Neovim, and you can just split them and add as much as you want until the point where you can't actually see anything. Okay, so that was one way. Let me close this and show you the other way. For example, sometimes I'm not actually making the split before searching the file. Sometimes I'll just go and search for the file immediately using Neotree on the right. And here is the components.json. If I want to show this on the right side, while I'm focused on it in Neotree, I can just hit S, and there we go. Now it's on the right side. I can also do a vertical split. For example, if I hover on the package.json, and you can't really see it because of my camera is there, but I'm focusing on package.json, and I can do Shift S or like capital S, and that's gonna make a vertical split and put package.json there. And I can just now hide the Neotree, and I got the same layout that I created with SV and SS, which is pretty cool. But what if I want to show a terminal on the right side? Not a file, but an actual terminal. Well, that's when Tmux comes in. Instead of using Neovim splits, I'm going to create a Tmux split with Control B for Tmux and then H for a horizontal split. So now on the right side, I have a terminal, and on the left side, I have a file. And this is useful if I want to do npm run dev on this side and write code on the other side while I'm, I don't know, executing the app on a different screen. And I'm also reading the log files right here, so I don't have to jump between windows, because that is my usual setup. I don't have logs here unless I really have to follow along. I usually keep my logs here in the second window in Tmux. So I do npm run dev here, and I switch over between windows when I want to look at the logs versus when I want to write code, etc. But I have an option to do it in one window as well. Let me bring back the splits because I want to show you something really cool. Components.json and then an SS, and this is going to be package.json. There we go. So we have three splits, and you might have guessed it, I can navigate between them using control and then J, K, L, etc. So I can jump between them. That's not the only thing that I can do, right? For example, if this file contains longer sentences, I can hold Option and then do L to resize it. So as you can see, I'm pushing over the files on the right, the two splits on the right, to actually make more room for this split. I can do it vertically as well. So if I'm in this file in package.json and I want to look more lines, again, holding Option and then K or J will actually resize that file and let me see more or less from that file. So this is how I use splits in Neovim and also Tmux to create splits, to move between them, to resize them if I want to write code and see multiple files at the same time, or even terminals using Tmux. Neovim also supports tabs, but I don't actually use them that often. You can create a tab by leader, tab, tab. As you can see at the top, it actually creates a new tab, and I can open, I don't know, package.json here. So now to switch between these two, all I need to do is just hit tab. So there we go. I can create a new one with the components that, yeah, let's go with separator. And I can jump between these three now. Or shift tab if I want to go previous. But as I mentioned, I don't really use tabs. I just use splits. I resize them, I jump between them. I use windows in Tmux to look at different contexts, if you will. For example, npm run dev, as I mentioned. I can even do another window and put lazy docker, so I can look at the Docker container logs right here. Okay, so that was layouts, splits, etc. Let me show you how I do version control. So I'm not using Git through the command line. I'm actually using Git through a plugin called LazyGit. And just like the lazy Docker that I showed you a few seconds ago, LazyGit looks pretty much the same. I can invoke it by leader or space GG. It's going to open a little floating window on top of everything inside Neovim, and it will give me an overview of the current repository. Right? So here is the status of the repository. Any files. Let me actually cause a change. There we go. So now I can see I have a change in this file. The red minuses is what I deleted. The green pluses is what I added. And I can stage this file with space, or I can hit D and then enter if I want to discard all of these changes. Or if I want to commit, I can just hit C and write my commit message here. And this is going to commit the file. If I want to push to the repository, I will do Shift P for push and just P for pull. These are my local branches. I can do C for checkout, or I can do N for a new branch. For example, new branch, hit enter, there we go. Now we're in this new branch. If I hit enter, I'm gonna see all of the commits. If I wanna switch back to main, all I need to do is just hover on it, hit space, and there we go. If I wanna delete this branch, D, and then enter, and there we go. So this is basically how I use Git. I'm not typing in commands, git commit, git push, etc. I'm just using LazyGit. Okay, let's get into some tests now. So as I mentioned, I'm using neotest. There we go. Here's a unit test file. Now these check marks are going to be correct. For example, the last time that I triggered the test, it passed. If I want to trigger it again, I can do leader T for tests and then R, which is run nearest. Since my cursor is within the test, it's going to run the tests because that is the nearest test, right? Hit R, you can see a little loading icon, and then we see a check mark again. This means that I rerun the test and it actually passed. If I want to trigger an error, let me actually make a mistake, save this, and if I do leader TR again, we're gonna see an X. Why? Because the test failed. I see a little window at the bottom telling me this is the promise. It rejected with this message instead of resolving. I expected this promise to resolve, but it actually didn't. It threw an error, cannot find the link with that fingerprint. If I want to look at the log, floating window, I can do leader T and then O for output, and then just scroll down. There we go. It gives me the exact line of code where this error happened, the assertion error, and the actual message right here. Cool, so let me undo this, rerun this, and there we go. Now it's passing again. And this is not the only way where you can run tests, of course. Sometimes you want to run for example, a whole test file or a test suite, or maybe even all of the tests in your application. Sure, you can go into a different Tmux window and do npm run tests. That's always going to be available, but I can also do it within Neovim. And if I do leader T and then S for the summary, I'm gonna get a little pane here. Let me actually resize this so you can see. I'm gonna get a pane with all of the tests and all of the files. So these are all of the files and all of the tests, and the violet ones, like the purple ones, these are test suites. If I hit I, it will take me to the implementation, or where this, where this is defined, the update collection test suite. There we go, describe. Let me actually jump into the delete collection test suite. Should throw when deleting someone else's collection. So I'm here. If I press I, there we go. I'm taking to this line that actually defines the tests. So I can jump between the tests using I. I can toggle expand these if I want to get them out of the way. I can run a test by hitting R while I'm focused on it. I can run a test suite. I can run a test file. I can run a folder, a bigger folder, an even bigger folder, or I can also just run all of the tests that I have in my application. Just focus on whatever you want and hit R, and there you go. So that's basically how I use neotests to invoke my tests, look at the logs, see why they're not passing or why they are passing. The next thing that I want to show you is debugging, and I'm going to show you how I debug tests because we're still in the testing phase, but then later I will show how I debug my actual applications. So let's get into these tests. Debugging tests is made available by using the neotests and DAP plugins, and LazyVim actually configures them together. So if I want to add a breakpoint, all I need to do is leader, D for debug, and then B for breakpoint. And as I'm adding these breakpoints, you can see little circles. These are the actual breakpoints. They're not just dumb breakpoints. For example, I can go here to the collection and I can say leader D and then change the breakpoint condition by capital B. So Shift B, I can type in the breakpoint condition right here. For example, if the authentication service dot underscore users of 0 equals hello. And when I hit enter, you can see the icon will change to a question mark because this is a conditional breakpoint now. And it only will be triggered if that condition is met. So I got my breakpoints here. In order to run or debug these tests, I need to do leader T and then D for debug nearest. Hit T and there we go. We're going to see a new UI. We're going to see a few panes appear. And let me actually hide my camera for this. These panes are really cool. And you can toggle them. First, you can toggle them by leader D and U. That's basically debug UI. You can toggle the debug UI on and off if you want to see the panes or if you don't want to see the panes. So the first pane right here represents all of the local variables and any variables that you might have in your current block and even global ones. Okay, so you can see all the variables. You can actually inspect them, see their values here. Again, just like any pane in Neovim, you can expand this, resize this if you want to read more or less. Or if you don't even want to see it, you can :Q and then you'll just remove the pane altogether. Then in the next pane, we have the breakpoints pane. And this is basically a list of all of the breakpoints that you have. If you focus on a breakpoint and hit O, it will take you to the line where that breakpoint is being set. For example, here's the fourth one, the third one, this one, and if you see closely, you can see condition here. This basically says that the breakpoint on this line has this condition, and you can actually preview the condition. This is never going to pass because users is an object, and we're comparing it with a string. Okay, then we have the call stack at the bottom. Then we have the expressions pane, and I can do expressions that will update automatically. For example, authentication service dot underscore users of 0. I can actually see that this is an object that has an ID and email, and the email is one@bfed.sh. Okay, so as this value changes, the expression value will automatically change. So this is useful if you want to keep an eye, if you always want to keep an eye on a specific variable or the output of a specific expression. Okay, then on the right side, we have the REPL. And what you can do here is just hit I, and then you are inside of the REPL console. You can do 2 + 3, which is nothing impressive, but it gives you an idea. You can also do authentication service underscore users of 0, hit enter and evaluate this expression. And there we go. It logs out the object, right? Expressions. And then on the right side, we have all of the output. And this one is the unit test output. Okay, these are the panes. Again, you can toggle them by DU if you don't want to see them. Now, actually, let me show you how to jump between breakpoints and, step over, etc. If you remember step over from before, it was D lowercase o, not the uppercase. I swapped them. So leader D O will actually move the execution to the next line. So now we're on line 257. If I do DO again, it's going to jump over this execution. It's going to create the collection. And then now we are on line 262, where we can expect the collection created by to be 1, which is the user 1. If I want to see what the value of collection is, I could add an expression here, but that's going to be too much. I can evaluate it in my REPL here, and that involves typing the variable, or I can just go to it like this, and then just do leader DE for evaluate. And this is going to show me a little floating window with the value of this variable. If I want to jump into it, I need to do DE again, and there we go. Now I'm inside of this little window. I can see the values. I can copy this line or copy this line, etc. Another thing that I often do is I would set up breakpoints in multiple files and then just do leader D and then C for continue. This is basically going to execute everything until the next breakpoint. So when you're debugging an operation flow that involves multiple files, this is the way to go. Set up your breakpoints in tries, in catches, etc. and then just do DC, right? Debug, continue, debug, continue. So that's how you jump between the breakpoints. In the meantime, you can do evaluations to see the values, and I feel like that is the most productive way to debug. When I'm debugging, I can do DC to continue the execution, or I can do D and then T to terminate. And you don't see it now, but let me hide my camera again. There we go. To terminate the current debugging session. Okay, that was debugging tests. Debugging your app is literally the same. For example, let me go into the create collection controller file. There we go. I'm going to put a breakpoint on the first line of the method. I'm going to put a breakpoint on the line where we're creating a collection, and also at the end before we return the return of the presenter. I'm also going to go into the actions file inside of the collections folder, search for, and I didn't show you this, but you can type in slash, and at the bottom you'll see a little slash. This is basically searching file. So slash create collection, hit enter to search for that string, and then just hit N to jump to the next occurrence, or capital N to jump back to the previous occurrence. Okay, so I was looking for the create collection. I can hit escape to remove the search highlights, and I'm gonna add 2 more breakpoints, for example, in the first line here, so I know that I'm entering the create collection server action. I want to break before actually invoking the controller. I want to break inside of the catch, and additionally I want to break on the redirect, and this is basically a good flow. So instead of TD, test debug, because this is not a test, I'm going to say leader D and then A, which stands for run with arguments. This is going to give me the configurations from my launch configurations. And all I need to do is just pick the Next.js debug full stack. There are 2, that means I most likely have a bug in the way that I'm pulling these configurations, or maybe LazyVim has a bug, but these are the same. I can just hit enter. It's going to prompt me for the arguments, dev, sure, invoke npm run dev with the debugger attached. Sometimes it hides the UI immediately, but that doesn't mean that we're not debugging. Right, if I do du, I can see the UI again. Okay, it's going to run most likely on 3001 if we, oh no, actually it's okay. Yeah, let's actually open localhost 3000 in our browser. There we go, and actually go and trigger the server action. Okay, there we are. This is the create collection dialog. If I hit create, it's going to trigger the server action. So hit create, go back to Neovim, and there we go. We are inside of the server action. We're in the actions.ts file, and this is the create collection action. Again, I can do do to jump out. I can do dc to go to the next breakpoint, which is not going to be this. It's going to be the one inside of the controller, because I put a couple of breakpoints in there too. So let's see that. There we go. dc, we are in the controller now. I can do do, dc if I want to go to the collection use case, dc to the presenter. These check marks are annoying. I have to fix this. But yeah, if I dc again, I'm going to go to the redirect breakpoint, not this one, because it didn't actually throw. We didn't actually invoke the catch block, we are immediately here. DC again will continue the execution. And there we go, collection created at the bottom. So yeah, this is how I debug Next.js applications. This launch configuration does not debug the Chrome. I know it said full stack, but I think I have an issue with it because it won't let me debug the client side or whatever's in the browser. I have been working on a project before that had a working Chrome debugging launch configuration. I just haven't had the time to put it in this project. But it is possible to also debug the front end or whatever happens in the browser using Neovim. You just need a different type of launch configuration for that. But yeah, that's also how I debug my applications. So we saw version control, we saw tests, we saw debugging, we saw how I navigate between files and codes and how I create my layouts when I want to see multiple files or jump between windows, or how I use Tmux, or how I switch between sessions in Tmux, which are actually bound to my projects. So yeah, there's a lot. I know this is a lot to unpack, but if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, or even better, you can go to creatures.sh, which is my Discord server, and I have a Neovim channel in there. Feel free to join, feel free to ask any type of questions regarding this video or Neovim in general. So, I hope you liked this video. This was a big one. Share it with your friends if you think that it's useful, okay? Thanks for watching. I'm gonna see you in the next one.